In today's Designer Quick Tips, we're going to look at fairway undulations and how you can use them to influence strategy of your hole. Now the first thing to note is you're going to want to create the plot yourself. I've linked below a really good video from Mayday, which is how I learned to do this. Basically, as you'll know, that fairway auto flattens the terrain unless you've sculpted the land first. So you're going to want to flatten the whole thing out and then create your own hills and undulations, and that's what I've done here. Once you do that, then you can lay fairway down over it, and what you see is what you get. Now the first point with fairway undulations, you're going to want to make this fit the course. There are certain courses, like this one for example, that are going to want to be pretty flat. So I'm using this as an example, but the vast majority of this course is going to be pretty flat, so it's not going to make a lot of sense for loads of undulations. However, let's presume we were doing a more linksy affair. Well, suddenly you're going to want to incorporate that randomness a lot more, and I think when you start doing this it gives you much better, more interesting hole designs, because you can work off what the land has given you rather than imposing kind of what you see on the land as much. Now the first thing I tend to do, if you can, try to look towards the sun. You might want to bring the lighting round because it just makes the undulations pop a little bit more. So let's say we bring the lighting round to there. Well, as you can see, if we put it right behind us, it washes out a lot of the land. It gets quite tricky, whereas you want to see the land kind of, how to explain it, the sunlight kind of coming over the hill, and that will leave the shadows going about this way. So actually where we had it was probably pretty much optimal. Now in terms of the next thing to do, I think it's really about highlighting key features that you can spot, and I guess my main tip is stay a long way away from this. Now this big fuzzy flattened brush can be your best friend. It can also wash out an awful lot of the interest, and really you probably also want to spend a lot of time studying the land before you do anything else to it. And I wouldn't even look at distances at this stage. I've put down a hole so you've got a rough idea of what we've got. I might first look at a green site. When I'm looking at that, I'm looking at what are all the little rises and falls. So here I might immediately be seeing, well, we could have obviously a little finger of green there and you have a pin here. If that's the case, well, do we want to bring it round there so that that swale comes into the green a little bit more? And if so, well, I guess we've got a little pad there. You can kind of just see what the land is sort of doing, but I might decide that actually we don't like that. So once you've got your first read, I guess what's the second one? And think about it as every kind of little raised plateau could also be something that funnels the ball down somewhere else. So what if we suddenly decided, well, actually, you know what, I want to put the green here. That's going to be a giant green, but you get the idea. And then suddenly this becomes a kicker slope. Well, actually then, how does that influence the rest of your hole? Or maybe do you want to come from here and then actually, you know what, you've got your green banked against here, and you're now looking at this little swale, which is what, 6-7 feet. That's pretty hefty. So I think the first point is, once you've got the land like this, really look at it from different angles and don't get sold on an idea too quickly, because I've built holes where I've basically seen one little ridgeline like this and built the entire hole based on how I want to approach that. So if I'm thinking about how might I use this, well, if I don't want to be hitting over that ridgeline, which is going to require me to be more precise, I want to be coming in from this direction. Well, therefore, if I'm going at 282, well, how do I make this fairway interesting? Where do I put hazards? Well, I might put a bunker here, and then your ideal tee shot is going to carry this one and roll to about here. Whereas any further, actually you're getting a bit more of an angle, maybe you're hitting towards that runoff, so maybe that doesn't work so well. Well, maybe we get rid of those two bunkers and we think, well, actually this is the right hand side, so actually I want bunkers here, and you've got to attack those bunkers in order to generate the angle, but I'm also going to let you equally. Now you see this makes much more sense as a whole, because I'm looking, saying, well, this is your ideal position to attack that green. Less ideal position is down here. Well, actually this position is really well guarded, because not only have you got the two bunkers here that are quite penal hazards, you could also roll all the way down to here and if you hit anywhere on this ridge line, you could be rolling down here and you've got a worse angle in, and we then play off that. So really, I guess that's point one. Point one is going to be find a feature, build off that. Now, you also want to consider whether you want to start at the green and work backwards or start on the fairway. I mean, main features of this, well, we've got a ridge line going through here, so you can see you've got kind of high land, low land. That could be really interesting to work with. It means you get side slopes, which are going to make a right-handed golfer want to pull the ball left. You can work with that in terms of how you set up the hole, things like that. But you'll notice we've done no sculpting whatsoever. We are, at least not yet, we're purely looking at what the land has given us and how we could use it in an interesting way. So let's go with that first idea. Let's say we were going to have a bunker here, or rather the second idea, bunker here. I tend to stagger them slightly. We're then going to have a fairway that's going to go all the way down to here. It's going to be quite a wide fairway. Actually, maybe not all the way down there. We'll go down to here. And then we'll show you roughly how we deal with actually massaging those fairway undulations a little bit. Now, one way I kind of like to do fairway width is drawing these and then draw your fairway using your measure tool around them. It allows you to really just work out where you're choking driver and where you're not, where you're adding width, where you aren't, making sure that the fairway just kind of makes a bit of sense, I guess. In this case, I'd probably drag the tee shot backwards a little bit. Yeah, we definitely would. So let's say we'll take the tee back just for argument's sake. There we go. We've got driver challenging this flat plateau. It's got the risk of going into those two bunkers. Okay, the distances aren't perfect. You get a kind of minor penalty if you're rolling down here, but you could potentially roll all the way into heavy rough. Probably wouldn't love that, and we'll look at that in a minute. Then we'd said we're going to put the green down here, and we're going to go with like green shape like this, not 13, let's make it like 20 odd. And as ever, a lot of this is just understanding what a sensible kind of default size of green is, and all of this is going to run off two features and using those two in harmony. So we've got that ridge line here, the fact that everything's falling right to left here, and then everything's falling right to left here. And this is kind of one of my favourite types of holes to design, so I guess it's no surprise that I've seen this in the land that we've got. So let's say we're taking fairway around here, and we're probably bringing fairway up here. Now, another good rule of thumb is for every hurting slope you have, like this one, try to have one that would help. Well, in that case, it would be around about here. So if you look at that going 3 feet downhill, well, that means that we're going to be able to bounce and approach short for a front pin and have it go from short right and roll onto the green. So generally pretty useful. Now, a lot of people who play my courses will typically think they're quite hard, because often if you're not really looking for that slope and how to attack a green creatively, you're only going to see the slopes that are taking your ball away. And one of the features I think of my courses tends to be that actually often playing away from the flag slightly is a better way to get the ball ending up there, and land movement's key. So what we're going to look at is now just how we might massage the land. You've got a rough idea of, and we're not going to look into sight lines or anything, that would be a different tutorial. But let's say we just pop the land down around about here. Awful fairway spline, but you're going to get the idea. And you can see immediately this is why it was key that we did that plot design at the start, where all of your undulations basically are going to stay. It's quite a large green, probably a little bit too large, but yeah, it's okay. And you can see that the undulations have kind of stayed. The textures for this are awful in terms of the colours, but we can work with it. Oh, and we'd have two bunkers in here. Let's just do placeholders for the moment. and then we can clear all of our measure tools. Now I think even looking at this now, I don't think it needs all that much, but there's a few brushes that I think are really useful for helping to not only kind of generate these undulations but improve them. I'm going to try to keep this relatively quick. The first one is obviously your fuzziest brush. This one's just going to make things smooth. If we look at just dropping something by a foot, you can't, like, it's happening, but it's very gradual, it's not very pronounced. That's really useful for kind of green sloping and in and around greens, I guess. One of the more interesting ones for adding a lot of character can be this one. So bottom right of page 3, and I hadn't started using this one until really recently, but it's great for giving some ridge lines. If you make it relatively small, a couple of feet, you can get some very interesting little bits of undulations. That's gonna frustrate me no end. Equally, this one does the same sort of thing, it's just a little bit harsher. So if we were to, let's say, take this down a little lower, you can see how you can make that into quite an interesting fall off. Now, I'm not at this stage really playtesting anything, we're still doing it all pretty visually. When we get into, so I'd always try and do your big moves first, and for me, getting whole ideas down as a group is really important, and you basically want to have the ideas so that when you come to actually polishing the whole, you know that it plays well, but also so that you can fly around all 18 and at a glance work out if they're all going to play differently or similarly or whatever. And you can see the natural green we've got here. I mean, it's still flowing right to left. We've got a front portion of the green, which I might work with. Other tools I might use this one, and you'll notice again we're still really not trying to touch flatten if we possibly can, because flatten can be great for polishing at the end, and I'll show you a way we could use flatten later on, but what I find it does at this stage is really just removes a lot of the interest you might have, whereas raise, it's not going to wash anything out. So there's our green now, and that's kind of how we would use those undulations. I still think a lot of this is best done using your eye, and just click and drag stuff. See, like, the main thing really I think that works for this is just play around with it and see what works. Like, what does your eye want to see? Try to make it happen, and just playtest shots. I mean, if we were, let's say we'd landed here, I'm going to play from here on this hole. Or if I did land it short, how does that ball react? And just try to get an idea, is that where you would want the shot to end up? Or do you want the shot doing something different? Or actually, another thing I think you'll find that's really interesting with this is ground game really works well with long approaches, so you want to be hitting a long club into it, and for that reason 140, well, people are still going to want to take dead aim at the flag and land it there, unless for this pin we can really encourage them to go here. But if you're hitting something like 180 into this, that's going to actually react a lot better and play better than if you have a pitching wedge, and so it's worth bearing that in mind as well. Now, I did say I was going to show you how to use flatten as well, and this can work. Take your fuzzy brush on flatten and just click and drag. It does wipe out some of the interest, and I think this is not the way I would preach doing it, but I do think it's the easiest way. Certainly this is how I did all of it on Kayuma. It leads to a slightly more, what's the word, probably manufactured look, in that it's all just a little smooth, but you can see it's kind of retaining the same thing, and it's probably your easiest way, and all of this is just click and drag at different heights, and I mean, as ever with sculpting, it really is all just about practice. Final thing I guess you can do is kind of just spam sculpt a little bit and just see what happens. So this was one that I use for Generally you want the fuzzier shapes, the hard shapes don't tend to work so well. But also don't worry about if you only want to use, say, this very top right bit of the brush. Make the brush really, really big. You won't notice it anywhere else unless it's on another hole already. And let's say we wanted to swale front right with that sort of shape. Well, you can do something like that. And okay, it's very severe, but you can see what that shape has done. And if you go undo, you can see the effects of it. So I guess really that's about it. I think the main thing is how you use them, not so much how you create them, but hopefully Mayday's tutorial gives you an idea on how to do that. Once you've got them, it really is far more about massaging rather than, certainly if you find yourself doing things like this pretty regularly, like, first of all, look at the interest we've got there, look at the ways you possibly got to a front pin of bouncing up here. You've got, and even when you're bouncing it from there, well, because of this little slope here, you're going to want to land it about here. You can't be sure or it's kicking you further down. Things like that. Like, look at the slopes and think about, if I landed it here, where would it go? So now though, let's say we did take our fuzzy brush at flatten and did what we might usually do. I mean, it's just all gone. Like, yeah, it probably still rolls in a bit, but that's an infinitely more boring hole than this one. And this gives you and we talk about options a lot in design. This gives you so many more options because of how the land is functioning, and like, but also not punishing you too much for missing. Like, whereas you don't need multiple bunkers to create options, you just need interesting land that is used thoughtfully. So anyway, a little bit of a longer one, but I hope that this one helps and gives a little bit of insight into kind of how I do it, but also how you might think about working everything off one slope or one idea.